where people can basically ask questions.
Sounds good.
And then I can pass those into this conversation. So I've sent an email to Linda. I've also sent an email to Gary Taylor. So those two should hopefully be joining us in the Google Hangout here. The other person you can see here is Robert. Robert actually has been doing VR stuff for many years, and he's currently working for Microsoft. So,
hi Robert,
hey,
how you doing?
I'm good. It's a little on the early side, but feeling good.
Thanks for joining us.
tab. There we go. So that one, I'll get rid of that one. Where is my messages? That's what I want. No, that's not what I want. Where is the should be giving me should be a message tab under this. There has previously been. Chat is disabled. Really? I want chat enabled. Really?
Stefan, I just noticed something here. So on the time zones we have, we're expecting it to start at 2:00, right? British Standard Time, but I think it's here as Greenwich Mean Time, which would mean British Standard Time will be 3 p.m. So I'm just wondering if anybody has fallen foul of that.
I didn't know you had a British Standard Time. As far as I was concerned, it's Greenwich Mean Time. Nobody ever told me. I'm an Australian. What do I know about your time zone?
Okay. Let's see what happens.
How on earth? Chat is disabled for this live stream, and I don't know why, and I'm really annoyed. I want to actually enable it. Robert, can you do me a really big favor? Can you just do a Google search for if it's possible to enable chat on a YouTube live stream once it's started? There is Mr. Gary Taylor.
Live chat is enabled by default. That's Google. Add a live chat on YouTube. That's old. Live streaming API.
What's really annoying is it's got a thing there saying chat is disabled, but it doesn't have a thing saying, well, you're the person hosting it. Here's a big red button for you to turn it on.
Stream chat. Manage live chat. YouTube help. Manage live chat. Live chat's enabled by default and will appear to the right of the video player when your live stream is active. After your stream ends, viewers will see a replay of the live chat. Let me take a look and see if you're not crazy. I see the live chat. I'm not seeing the comments.
No, I'm not. Let's check advanced settings. Enable live chat. Save changes. Let's see if that's done anything. Chat is disabled. You know what I'm going to do? No, actually, I don't know if that's a good idea. If I stop the broadcast, it'll just archive the whole thing and I won't be able to start it again. This is really annoying. Previously, I have not had to enable it manually. It has been enabled automatically, and they've changed it because.
Hi guys.
All right, what I'm going to do. That is so frustrating. It means that people can't ask questions. which is really, really frustrating because it was the whole point of this thing so that people could join in and ask questions. And Google have changed their bloody settings.
Use the menu to pop out live chat.
See, I've enabled it in the settings, but because we're actually going now, I don't think that that's actually. Let
me refresh this.
Yeah, refresh at your end and see if it now has.
Yeah, there's a chat. You're good to go. Create a channel to join the chat.
Okay, so what I'm going to do in that case is go back here, and what are we doing? Okay, I'll just open it in another window if I actually get a new window.
Create a channel to join the chat.
Oh, great. Now I'm getting an error message on it as though it wanted to show me the chat, but show chat, and I'm getting an error on the chat. Well, and Linda's not here either. So I thought we were wanting to get Linda to open this up. So Gavin, I suspect really what you should probably do is you should probably open this up. We are now recording this. It's 3 minutes after when we were supposed to start. We can start the conversation.
All right.
Robert, can you actually post something in the chat on yours?
I can click on it and it does nothing. Maybe some kind of bug going on here.
Yeah, so there's a bug in YouTube that's not allowing us to actually do it properly, which is lovely. So this is going to end up being not much of a conversation, which really annoys me because the whole point of this was to get as much input as we possibly could. And so we've limited it now to a few people and whoever might be trying to watch it. There are 8 watching it now. There is going to be a delay on this. I'm going to explain to the 8 who are watching it now that we have tried to enable the chat function in YouTube, and it hasn't functioned. I'm getting an internal server error, which means we're not going to be able to. Actually, if people watching this on YouTube want to say something, try adding into the comments of the YouTube video, and I'll see if I can see it there. At which point I can pass on those questions.
Steph, do you know how to create a Discord channel?
No, what I was going to say is, Robert, can you take the Hangout link that I just sent you and copy and paste it into the comments? I want to see if it turns up, and then we can tell people to join the Hangout because there's still some spots in the Hangout. So just paste that Hangout link into the comments, and we'll see if that becomes visible. Now, apart from that, I think what I'll do is I'll shut up and get out of the way, and Gavin, I will let you start.
All right, thanks a lot. I mean, well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Stefan, for facilitating this and suffering all the technical problems for getting us here. So I appreciate that, man. That's it's really cool of you. So welcome, everybody. For those people who are watching on YouTube, we'll just give a quick kind of overview of who's here today. So just starting with myself, my name is Gavin Kearney. I'm an associate professor at the University of York in audio and music technology, and I'm also vice chair of the AES Technical Committee for Audio for Games. And with us we have Stefan. Stefan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Stefan Schutz. I've been working in game audio for close to 20 years. I wrote a book on VR audio stuff. And is it backwards? It's weird.
It's okay. It's okay for us. We can see it all right. It's good.
Wow, it's mirrored for me. I didn't even know it did that. Yeah, I work for Magic Leap. I've worked for Facebook. I've done VR stuff. That's me.
Great. Robert.
Yeah, hey there. I'm Robert Rice. I'm a software developer specialized in audio design and programming. I recently joined Microsoft Cognition, working on developer tools and applications. Prior to that, I've been working with studios all over the world in VR. Recently released Pixel Rip 1989, Paranormal Activity Lost Soul, and Buzz Aldrin Cycling Pathways to Mars. I also contributed a little bit to Stefan's book.
He did.
All right.
Actually, so did Gary.
Small world.
Great. Gary, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. I'm Gary Taylor. I'm audio director at Sony Interactive Entertainment Europe, part of the Creative Services Group. We do audio for various titles across Sony. Obviously, we've been working very closely with the team at Sony doing audio for PSVR.
Cool. Okay, and we're waiting for Linda to join, right? Have we heard anything from her, Stefan? Is she available?
I sent the link to the email I was requested to send it to. It is very, very early in California, so yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully she'll be able to join us by the time we get to talk about Avar. Okay. Well, cool. Which sort of leads us to the next thing, which is about upcoming events, which are happening related to audio for new realities and XR and VR and AR. And I guess the first one is Avar, which is impending. And Linda's going to join us and talk a little bit about what's going to be in store for Avar, what we've got to look forward to. There's a lot of cool stuff happening there. And as far as I understand it, it's going to be an extremely well-attended conference with some really killer talks and some really killer tutorials and papers. So really looking forward to hearing about that. Coming up after that, though, is the AES 145th convention in New York, and that's going to be October 17th to the 20th in the Jacob Javits Center in New York, and that's a co-location with the NAB show there. And we've been designing a spatial audio VR track, so that when I say we, I mean the Audio for Games Technical Committee. So myself, Michael Kelly, Steve Martz, and various other contributors, Scott Selfman from Oculus, Laurie from Dolby, Damien from Lost Chocolate, Mark Shafkin, and others. And that's going to be really cool. It's going to be tutorials on all the technical stuff, binaural, HRTFs, ambisonics, higher order ambisonics, but also, you know, some really cool stuff for WYs, for Unreal, Dolby Atmos game audio, and other workshops like on sound career paths in VR and AR, mixing in VR, interactive dialogue for game audio, recording techniques for 6DoF music production, and so there's lots of really, really cool stuff. So that's going to be a good show, and New York is always a great place to get to as well. So following that, then we will have something in Dublin. The AES 146th convention is going to be in Dublin. The dates were just announced this week. Obviously, it's just announced, so there's no formation of any VR AR track for that, or game audio track. So we'll keep people posted as we know more details. But that's going to take place March the 20th to March the 23rd, 2019. And the week after is when we're holding our conference here in York on immersive and interactive audio. And that's going to be March 27th to 29th at the University of York. And this is a conference which, of course, it has VR and AR and XR elements in it, but it's designed to look at that space where sensor technologies meet immersive audio systems. So yeah, naturally it will have a strong AR component, but the conference sort of moves beyond that to things like in-car entertainment, to mobile platforms, home entertainment, live sound reinforcement. So, you know, particularly looking at how to utilize non-tactile data such as listener, location, orientation, gestural control, and even biometric feedback like heart rate and that sort of thing, to be able to intelligently adjust the sound design. So yeah, we've a call for contributions out for that at the moment. So the full paper deadline is 1st of October. We have no intentions of extending that yet, but yeah, so hopefully we encourage submissions to get in by the 1st of October deadline. And we've also got a workshops deadline for 1st of November. So yeah, we're hoping that's going to be a killer conference as well. So yeah, that's the lineup of upcoming Avar game audio related stuff. I guess our next item on the agenda really was to have a rundown from Linda on what's happening with Avar, but maybe I don't think she's here yet.
Yeah, we could leave that to later in case she does turn up. I'll just update you. We do now have live chat working. We've got 10 people watching now. We've got somebody in Hamburg, somebody in Munich, somebody in Australia, somebody in Lithuania, somebody from Copenhagen. So good representation from Europe. And that's what you get for having it at 6 a.m. West Coast America. Just to explain to everybody why we're doing that. The reason why this is at 6 a.m. For West Coast is because the actual conference that's coming up is in Seattle. And so all the West Coast folk are going to be able to attend that quite easily. The rest of us everywhere else in the world, not so much. And so I thought for this first meeting, I wanted to try and make it as easy as possible for people in other time zones to actually get involved with this so we can actually hear from everybody. That was my motivation behind setting this time zone.
Absolutely. And the thing about it as well is that we are having another meeting at Avar. So, you know, all of those folks can attend there physically, and we can kind of continue the discussion there. Okay, so the kind of the next thing on the agenda is the discussion of where we are with the New Realities group and the discussion around the wiki resource that we're planning and sort of our short-term plan. So at the last couple of meetings, what we had said was that we want one of the main outputs from this group to be some educational resources, so that people who are, you know, sound designers or producers or technical researchers can drop in on a one-stop shop resource where they can find out as much information as possible on VR, AR, XR, whatever. And so we thought what would be a good idea would be if we try to develop some form of kind of living, breathing wiki resource that people can actively contribute, and that the Audio for Games technical committee will just sort of keep an overview of it and make sure that it's, you know, maintained and pretty well. But it's an open resource that people can collaborate to. Now, before we kind of launch that, what we want to do is get a working wiki in place, so that we have kind of an outline of baseline content there, and then that people can contribute at their leisure on a later time. So our target is to try to have an full online resource before the York conference in March next year. So what we've done is we've put out a call for contributors, and we've had some people come back and say, yeah, they'll be able to kind of help out in developing the wiki, and we have a skeletal resource list that we want to hit. Well, what we thought actually would be a good idea to try to really entice the wider community in would be to actually to hold more of these online meetings based around specific topics in the wiki that we want to hit. So, for example, we were hoping that we might be able to do this on somewhat more like a monthly basis, where, you know, next month we might talk about terminology around VR and AR. The next month after that, we could talk around theory of spatial audio, or you know, different formats, ambisonics versus channel-based. Or we could then move on to, you know, more of the practicalities of things. So looking at workflows, looking at linear, non-linear, you know, recording techniques, production techniques, and so forth. So we would have specific topics every month that we can try to tease out and to work together as a group, so that we can form up this wiki and populate all the different components. So that's kind of the working short-term plan. And, you know, this is open to comments and discussion here. So I'd love to get the group's input on this and what their thoughts are.
One of the main things for me, from the time I've been doing any of this work, from the research I did for the book, from just talking to people, is, and this is directly relevant to the wiki, is just terminology. Terminology is currently killing us, and it's killing us for a couple of reasons. And in fact, the release of the Magic Leap 1 the other day was the perfect example. You read any of the articles with this and everything like that, and they're all of a sudden going, oh, so we've decided to call this spatial computing. And it's like, great, thanks so much. Just what we all need, another proprietary term, just something else that we all have to try and think of. And we all have to basically go, no, you're talking about VR or AR. And this is the problem. And sorry, Gary, no offense, but every single big company wants to own the label. They want to have their own label for a thing. They want to have their own terminology so that they can, in some cases, they can have it proprietary and they can on it and everything like that. But this stuff doesn't help anybody. And it also means that when you get the snake oil salesman turning around, and I mean, seriously, it's died down now, but a couple of years ago, half of the Kickstarters out there were for brand new 3D audio something or other that'll do something, and they're full of terms that the average punter has got no idea what they mean. Anybody who is experienced in this field doesn't know what they mean, because they're kind of like, what are you even trying to say? And the claims that are being made are usually wild and in some cases even fraudulent. And so if we can at least as a group, especially for the wiki, say, this is what 3D audio means, and this is what spatial audio means, and this is what HRTF means, and this is what whatever means. It means that when all of a sudden somebody's basically going blah, blah, blah with terms, we can at least go on the wiki, we could go, well, yeah, okay, Magic Leap call it spatial computing, but it means blah. Or if there are people who are being totally dodgy, then other people can approach them and go, well, hang on, the official terminology or the semi-official terminology or the agreed upon terminology is XYZ. Where do you fall into that? Because as far as if we're going to do standards, we can't even start or consider standards until we know the labels that we're putting on things.
I think one of the issues is that the sort of landscape for what we're doing is incredibly new. There is a lot of innovation happening. There is a lot of new technology coming out, and I think people are just finding their place. They're getting their heads around the technology. They're getting their heads around the tools that are going to be needed. And I think although I do share your concerns, I think it's just symptomatic of where we are in a long road ahead, really. There is so much new tech coming out. Innovation is happening very, very quickly. And what we decide in the next year may not be relevant in 3 or 4 years' time. So
I'm not saying
I think it's just something to consider.
No, I agree, Gary. And I'm not saying it can't change. And in fact, I think the only way any wiki is useful is if it's an organic wiki. So like if we put a definition in for HRTF and then even 6 months down the track, somebody goes, oh, actually, we need to add these extra points and we need to take away that one because it's no longer relevant, then so be it. But my point is, I think at the moment is that, and I'm not trying to detract, as I said, I'm being a little bit narky about the Magic Leap thing because it just felt like just another one. But it's more a case of, for those of us who've got any clue at all, if we're reluctant to put down any terms or we're reluctant to provide any information or try to lock down anything in any way, then nobody else has got any hope at all, because they can just turn around and go, well, those guys are supposed to be telling us some of the standards and they don't know. So I think it's at least helpful to at least put a label on something. Doesn't mean that we won't throw the label away, edit the label, expand the label or whatever. And I'm not trying to take away from what you're saying. I totally agree with what you're saying, but it just still feels that it might be useful to everybody to just try to go, well, there's a term that's floating around, grab it, stick a pin in it for the moment at least.
Yeah, I agree. But as I say, it's very early days. I think lots of companies that are obviously want to get involved in it are trying to find a niche for themselves, and part of that is differentiation. Now, obviously, some of it is going to be great, some of it maybe not, but I think it's something that we're going to have to put up with for a while. But obviously, a wiki is a wiki, and it can be changed and it can be kept updated with the stuff that we feel is relevant.
Just out of curiosity, Stefan, so when you were writing your book, I mean, obviously you came across this problem where you had to, define things from the outset. How did you decide on specific terms to utilize there and then?
I tended to go with I tended to start by using things that were fairly well established, like interoral time delay and ITD and IPD and all those sorts of stuff. But even there, I think in one of them, was it IID or whatever? I can't remember. But there was one of them where it was like, I think my paragraph from the book, there was literally a paragraph going, yeah, some people call this, some people call this, and I found another group that call this. I'm going to call it this, for the sake of the book. And so in a couple of occasions, I acknowledged that even these things, and I mean, IPD has been used for ages. I mean, people have been talking about this stuff for a long time, and that one was fairly good. So was ITD, but IID, I think was, or one of them at least, there seemed to be 3 different definitions. And so I literally would give an explanation as to why I'd chosen it. I mean, in my book, I actually refer to AR as both augmented reality and alternate reality, because I'd heard both terms be used. So I kind of just went, you know what, I'm just going to shuffle these up to just see what happens, And sometimes you kind of got to do that. And this is my point. I don't disagree with anything Gary's saying. My feeling is if we stick a pin in something even temporarily, it might even help some of these people differentiate themselves, because they can actually say, oh, this term means this for most people, so we're going to actually use a slightly different term, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do understand and agree, Gary, that it is something that is tricky to pin down. But does that mean that we shouldn't try at all at this stage? And I mean that question sincerely. I mean, if you believe it's too early to try doing this, then please say so.
I don't believe it's too early. I just think just be prepared for things to be completely turned upside down at some point in the future.
Agreed.
Okay, so I think this is a great starting point for this, and actually the next meetup that we have, I think we should try and dedicate it around some of these topics. If possible, get some form of consensus around particular commonly used terms, that if you're a newcomer to VR and to AR, that you will get a good understanding of what's happening. Whereas if you're somebody who's been researching this for a while, that you kind of understand that, all right, these particular terms are known to me and I'm very comfortable with them. So let's see if we can meet some middle ground here, and make this the sort of topic of choice for the first one of these sort of wiki related discussions that we'll have next month. Does that sound good?
That is just one point. Again, sort of kind of on Gary's thing, because this thought just occurred to me. What we could do when we're doing the wiki, and this actually might help both, might help everybody, is that terms like IPD, for instance, which has been fairly locked down for quite some time, we could actually have some sort of icon or some sort of word near it going, established term, fairly secure, not likely to change. Whereas something like spatial audio, we can say, hey, this is the current term that most people are comfortable with. It means this. But we put this little mark on it saying that we can't guarantee that this term is going to have the same meaning in 6 months' time, because that itself makes the wiki even more useful, because we are in our experience sort of saying, hey, that term's pretty locked down. We know what stereo is. We know what the term means. It's not going to change. Whereas spatial audio could mean anything, and by letting readers of the wiki know there is that chance of variability, that makes the wiki a more valuable resource, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we really have to strive for, is to make sure that it's up to date constantly. So that'll be the challenge. But let's see how we go. Okay, great. That sounds good. So yeah, well, after we finish talking today, we'll set up a date for another online meet, so that we can at least hopefully get some terminology nailed down for the basic stuff, so that we can move forward then with the different topics in the wiki, which is awesome. Cool. Okay, so that will be an action on me to just to put out an initial list of different topic areas that we want to try to define some terminology for. That sounds good. Okay, so just kind of moving on down there, because I know when we get to the AVAR meeting, there will be some talk of standards at the AVAR meeting, and one thing that I really wanted to cover today and get the input from you guys on is what you think about standards in this area at the moment. Is it too early for standards, or is there something that we're low hanging fruit that we're missing here that we kind of say, yeah, yes, actually we could standardize this particular area that might make it easier for the audio community in certain aspects. I just want to open up this discussion, because certainly when we get to AVAR next week, we're going to have an opportunity to just talk to some people from AES Standards and give them our perspective on this. So what are your thoughts on standards, guys?
I'd love to jump in on this, at least for the games and interactive side. So there are technical requirements for Oculus and PlayStation that are very specific and different. There is nothing listed for Steam. So there's sort of a big gray area here for what people think in terms of loudness standards for games and interactive. And I think it'll be very important to seal those things in concrete sooner than later, because you get a lot of developers who say, I'll make it louder, and then some people say, make it softer. And you need to have the science there to present to them to get people on the same page, and just having things all over the place can get pretty wacky really fast, as we all know.
Okay. Gary, what's your thoughts on that, coming from your background on loudness standards?
So obviously it's very important for the developers to understand sort of best practices for all platforms. One of the problems, I think, for loudness standards is that there is a variability in amplifiers. So, for example, on PlayStation, we've got a loudness standard of -24. However, if you was to play content on that and then transfer it over to another platform, the headphone amplifier might be completely different. There is no standards covering power on VR VR audio amplifiers, and so what works for one might not work for another. One of the reasons that we went at -24 was to give people in dynamic range. I think dynamic range is incredibly important for VR, much more so than sort of screen-based content. And obviously, if you have your or if your target level is too loud, the louder you go, the less dynamic range you have.
I'm interested on that comment there, actually, Gary. So why do you think it is more important to have the dynamic range in VR than just in screen-based content?
Well, partly because you're playing on headphones and you potentially have less of a noise floor, potentially. Mm-hmm. The other is, it depends whether you, in my view anyway, it depends whether you are trying to not necessarily model reality, because that's not what sound designers do. It depends whether you're trying to create a believable reality. And I think the key word there is believable. Mm. But there are lots of, as I'm sure you know, lots of sort of psychoacoustic cues that rely on dynamic range in order for the brain to perceive what you want them to perceive. Things like, for example, distance. Distance is absolutely critical, or dynamic range is absolutely critical to perception of distance. And one thing I've noticed is that really compressed content just breaks it for me in VR. If I hear a voice, for example, some dialogue that is overly compressed, or it completely breaks it for me. your brain just says, right, okay, something is not quite right there. This isn't how I normally experience reality. And you go from sort of believing it into coming out and breaking it, and all of a sudden you're not really concentrating on the content itself. You're thinking, hang on, why does that jar for me? And I, through the work we've done, we've come to the conclusion, really, that, or a small group of us have, that that dynamic range is incredibly important for a bunch of things. Obviously, we need a fair amount of headroom for big events if we want them to be big. But again, coming back to the non-standard, the lack of standards on, and the massive difference in amplification, headphone amps, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, because if you create let's say we do a game and we hit -24 on PlayStation, it might sound really good, but then if it was then ported over to Oculus, say, and I think I was talking to Tom, their standards that they're hitting, I think, a -18 for Oculus. I may be wrong, but that's what I remember from him saying. Then that content is going to be really quiet, and you're going to have to either listen to quiet content, but as I say, it depends on what you're using to drive your headphones.
Okay, and do you think that the type of content itself also has a big impact on, you know, whether we should be using a larger or smaller dynamic range? I mean, for example, if it's cinematic VR versus you know, something that is more interactive, that is on a PSVR, you know, could we use the same standard across the board for loudness, or would it be different for different sort of genres?
Well, my own view is that, yeah, we should be going for a standard loudness level, not necessarily standard dynamic range level. The thing about -24 is that it gives you plenty of dynamic range if you need it. So there is some content that will need to be very dynamic. There is other content that won't be. But if you hit an established loudness level with enough headroom, then that means that you can use that dynamic range if the content that you're creating warrants it. Okay.
Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say a couple of points on that, and that's actually really interesting, Gary, because I just checked to see that something was on Steam, which is it backs up what you just said, because I was trying out the Star Trek Bridge Crew on PSVR, which I've really liked. Right. It's an amazing game, and my biggest beef with it is that on the remote control on the PSVR, I had it up to maximum volume, and I'm like, this is not very loud at all. And I just had to look why, because it was released on Steam, it was released on Oculus and Vive. And so basically they've probably been going with that. And as you've just said, it means that the result of that is on the PlayStation, the maximum volume is dropped back quite a lot. The comment I wanted to make in general, though, was, Gavin, one of the things that is really important, kind of seconding what Gary's been saying, is that distance and positioning and all of how we perceive sound, how the human ears and human brain actually processes all that information, is based on a whole bunch of information. And a lot of that is frequency based and amplitude based and obviously time based, right? And so where games came from generally, an awful lot, not everything, but an awful lot of what games kind of taught themselves as far as sound is concerned, they kind of got from Hollywood. And so we all had those really giant bassy explosions and as Gary's saying, you know, heavy compression on things, and everything had to be dialed up to 13. Everything had to be really powerful and in your face. Now, the problem with that is that if I'm trying to convince you that there is a sound that is in front of you and it is 20 feet and it is 45 degrees to your left or your right, There is a whole bunch of information that the brain will process with the expectations of that. So if I see the visual object and it is positioned over there, my brain is going to expect it to sound a certain way. Now, when that is in on a big, flat screen or in the cinema with Dolby or whatever, and the transformer comes on and it's giant thundery footsteps, etc., that's kind of fine. But as soon as we're trying to convince somebody that it actually exists in that virtual world and it's 20 feet away from them at 45 degrees over there, we can't just throw the Hollywood treatment at it, because it basically breaks, as Gary was saying, it breaks what our brain's expectations are. And we already don't understand 100% of how humans hear, but we understand enough to know that certain sounds do certain things over certain distances. And if I'm getting giant bass frequencies from something that's just over there, but the other frequencies are compressed and then the volume's over compressed and all this sort of stuff, my brain's just going, that doesn't exist. And it completely undermines. And in fact, one of the problems with, and one of the reasons why I think standards are very important, but one of the bigger problems with standards is right at the moment, and Gary and I talked about this at GDC, it's not even that we need to be looking at people working in game VR and saying, oh yeah, your mixing standards are a little bit out and you haven't quite got this. Most of them are not even doing spatial audio. There are games out there that literally have no spatial audio at all. There are games out there, big name games, that are presenting stereo environmental sounds, which is just appalling. I mean, the sorts of budgets these things have. And like, you've got Rain that when you turn your head, it follows your head around. So, I mean, to be honest, before we worry about whether people are going 18 or negative 18 or negative 24 or whatever, frankly, half the industry needs to be told how the format works in its core way and how to actually make the use of this. Because we're not going to, I mean, if something's the exact right mixing level and they haven't done anything spatial audio or whatever, it kind of matters a whole lot less.
Isn't there a, sorry, Gary, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I think that's something that maybe this group could start gathering information on and presented it on a wiki somewhere. Is basic psychoacoustic principles, how the brain perceives sound, because a lot of the tech and a lot of the information out there is about the tech itself, but you can't really expect to deliver great results when when there's a dearth of information regarding how humans perceive sound. I think that's very important.
I've been trying to do this. I mean, I've been releasing articles on LinkedIn, obviously the book, but I mean, one of the telling things was when I was engaged by the Facebook Spatial Audio team, they wanted me to do some videos, some training videos on their particular tool set. And what was interesting is the very first video they wanted me to make, they essentially came to me and said, look, before we do any of the technical stuff, we need you to explain to people how it works, because we've got really big top-level Hollywood studios that are being given these opportunities of 360 videos that's tied to some big franchise, and those guys know nothing about it, and they were getting it really, really wrong. And so the guys at Facebook were pulling their hair out, seeing some giant franchise throw huge amounts of money, and some studio down in LA would do a 5.1 mix and then whack it through headphones and go, there you go, there's your VR experience. And so literally the whole first video I did for Facebook was me pretty much telling Hollywood, sorry guys, you're getting it wrong. And here's why. And I had somebody significant in the industry, and I will not mention who or the company, who was literally trying to tell me, oh, and the really great thing about our system is that you can have a bunch of people in the room all with VR headsets on, and then you can all take your headphones off and share it through the set of speakers. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Are you? And like, I literally couldn't get out of that room fast enough, because I thought, if this person doesn't even understand some of the core things about one person with head tracking looking left and one person looking right, and they're thinking it can be done through speakers. And this was somebody who was significant and influential in the industry. So yes, we need to go back to primary school, you know, and teach people some of the basics of this, because they're getting it very wrong.
I think we also have another issue here, which is one of association. So you guys have rightly stated that from a psychoacoustic point of view, that we of course need to get the cues right, the distance cues, the lateralization cues, and so forth, to give good perception of sources in space. However, there's also that expectation from game sounds to be hyper real and visceral and to have, you know, those cinematic qualities. And there seems to be this constant battle to have something, you know, sounding really, really, you know, crisp and visceral and in your face, versus it sounding natural or rather plausible. So that's a real sound design challenge that I think we should really be cognizant of and aware of when we're kind of discussing all of this. And
one thing that here's a really good example that's worth putting this in the archive of the video. I went to the best talk I went to at GDC this year was basically the talk done by the guys at Skywalker Sound. Now, it shouldn't surprise me that it was the best one, but what came out of that was that many of the things that I discovered in the book, they raised, and it was really great because it made my life so much easier. Because all of a sudden, if anybody says to me, how do you know that stuff in the book is right? And I can just turn around and say, well, all the guys at Skywalker basically found the same things. But what they found was really interesting. So this is for the a VR linear VR experience that's been playing in LA, which sells out as soon as the tickets become available for it. And one of the things that they said was that they found that going through this to get and they iterated and iterated and iterated to get it right. And what they found was to get the end result that they really wanted, they had to combine certain elements of HRTF, certain elements of mono, certain elements of stereo, certain elements, and I've done the same myself. Like there's games that I've worked on where I've got a beautiful HRTF surround thing, and then I've got a specific stereo sound that under very defined circumstances comes in, because the stereo gives the really, really amazing proximity effect of the wind blowing directly past your ears, whereas the spatial stuff, because we know that it doesn't really kick in till about a meter out, doesn't do that. And so there's all these sorts of things where it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, but basically the best technique for any situation is the technique that gives you the results you want. So if you have to mix a surround sound file with a mono sound file, with a stereo sound file, with a binaural sound file, with a ambisonic sound file to get that end result, that's what you do. So to sort of try and say that there's one right way of doing any of this thing, and this is to, Gavin, this is to address your thing about that Hollywood sound. What we need to do is we need to be talking to all the developers that we work with, and they're sort of saying, we want rah, rah, rah. And we need to sort of go, okay, but what you need is an impactful thing. And so in some ways, we almost need to, the old adage of it's always better to show than to tell. It's just go off and do something. They put their headphones on and go, wow, what's that? And it doesn't matter whether it was exactly what they asked for or not. If as long as it gets that wow result at the end, and you can explain to them, well, what I did was X, Y, Z to get you what you wanted or what you needed.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we have a similar issue with in the music industry. You know, the work that we're doing currently with Abbey Road, we're looking at production frameworks for live music production in VR. You know, so the idea, you go into a studio, you record a band, but you're in that VR experience where you're at Abbey Road Studio 3 and you're watching the band. We set up an Eigenmic in the middle of the room, and all the theorists will say, okay, if it's a natural sounding room and it's a nice acoustic, it's all going to sound lovely and plausible. It won't. It sounds terrible. You always need to have spot microphones to support it, and choosing the right microphones to do that. And then, of course, you also have to think about how you're rendering this whole thing. So is it going to be object-based? Is it ambisonics? What order of ambisonics? What HRTF sets are you using? So all of these different variables, it's a minefield. And the question is, can we create some sense out of that? Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, they fry most people's head because there are so many variables, so many different ways of doing things. I mean, as an example, one of the games that we're currently making, which is for PSVR, the weapon sounds are made up of stereo sounds, mono sounds, objects, and ambisonics all together.
Yep, I did the same thing. I did the same thing for free roaming experience, basically, because the weapon was here. It had a mono element there and another 3D element that over in the distance that was basically wandering around, like the Echo was wandering around there. It had a stereo element that was on the gun, but as soon as the gun moved over here, we switched off the stereo element because it was no longer in the sweet spot. There was all sorts of layers going on, and that, yeah, it sounds like, you know, Gary's team's doing the same sort of thing that I've discovered. And this is the thing. Quite often, what I do is I'll literally just keep hitting things with a hammer until something works. You know, try this, didn't work. Try this, didn't work.
Something breaks.
Or something breaks. Yes.
Well, I think that's really good, and these are the sort of things that could be reported potentially as case studies within the wiki as well, to kind of show, okay, here's a product, or here's a game, or an experience that was created with certain techniques for a particular genre, and this is what worked and this is what didn't work. And I think that would help a lot of people with the learning curve of all of this, to kind of understand other people's perspective and other people's stories in all of this. You know, that when they've gone to record a band, or when they've gone to, you know, produce an interactive VR game, these are the problems they had with this particular platform, or with the particular resources that they had. So that's great. And that's also for the wiki, and I think that, you know, having some pages, and particularly maybe some videos as well that would support that, would be really good. But back to the standards thing.
Well, hang on, just one point before back to the standards thing. What I was going to say is I honestly believe that before we get to the standards, and I think AES really is probably one of the organizations that should be doing this and is very well equipped to doing this, there needs to be a massive amount of education. Because telling people that you've got to be mixing at -24, when then, like, literally, it's the whole sort of, like, you know, the stories from years ago of people buying home theater systems with 5.1 speakers and lining them up on one bookshelf, or hiding them behind books or whatever. You know, if people don't know how to use the tools properly, having standards for those tools it's almost irrelevant. I mean, we need to be educating people on how to use the hammer before we say how big the hammer should be and how heavy the hammer should be.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's when we started this discussion last year about the development of the wiki. That was the route that we were taking. You know, that we were thinking that we need to educate people. We need to also find the common areas with all of these technologies, and maybe there's something in there, some things that need to be standardized. I mean, if we take, for example, you know, some common elements that we come across in all of this. For example, ambisonics. You know, ambisonics we typically will find with most you know, VR experiences, be it nonlinear or cinematic or whatever, that you're usually you're into an Ambix format, so it's ACN, SN3D. You know, there are certain things within that can help the development of particular pipelines and tools, and converting from one platform to the next, making that a little bit easier. And I'm just wondering, is there other things that we're missing here? I mean, HRTFs themselves are their own minefields, you know, whether to use generic or individualized. And if you're using generic, what generic HRTFs should you be using? It seems that most people are, you know, gravitating towards the likes of KU100 HRTFs. But again, you know, are these things that we should be standardizing? I mean, I know, for example, the AES has an exchange format for HRTFs, the SOFA format, AES69, which is, you know, one way in which we can kind of, you know, add individualized HRTFs to platforms. But are there other things around this that you guys think could be standardized within the technical details that could make things easier when working across multiple platforms?
I'll just quickly say, I think, again, this sort of is going to be falling into the realms of what Gary said earlier on. When I was at Magic Leap, we were going through various different plugins and HRTF things almost more often than we were having hot lunches. At one point, somebody did a really brilliant analysis where they basically had a blind test of a whole bunch of different HRTF plugins for us to test out. And so literally it was in a little app, we downloaded on our phone, we'd have a listen to it, and then we just report back. like it was reported back to this person. But one of the things that was really interesting is that if there was like 6 HRTF plugins to select from, and you had 10 people who evaluated all of them, the feedback was almost completely different in all cases. But what was really interesting is that I might find HRTF number 1 really excellent for sound design, but when I listened to music through it, I didn't like it at all. But then when I listened to HRTF 2, that sounded really good with music, but sounded bad with sound design. And the other one sounded great with voice or whatever. But then somebody else would have almost the complete opposite reaction to that. So and some of the research, I mean, I looked at some research which was incredible, where they basically got, and this has been argued backwards and forwards, but they basically got one of the standard HRTFs they were doing, then they got something like 100 people, and it might have only been 60, but they got a group of people. They actually made custom HRTFs for all these people. They measured their ears, did all the scanning, all that sort of stuff, and then they basically played them a whole bunch of content. And they said, it was a blind test, but like, here's your personal HRTF, here's one of the custom ones, and here's a really generic one. And something like 60% of the people tested did not prefer their own personally constructed HRTF. They preferred one of the generic ones. So, I mean, where does that leave us?
I can tell you, you know, from somebody who's done a lot of HRTF measurements, and I know, you know, other people who've done it. It can be a tedious process. It's the processing alone after the measurement phase can also be very, very tricky and problematic. And so, you know, the idea that now we could go out with, you know, phones and take pictures of our ears and then upload them to the cloud and get a magical set of HRTFs back is very appealing. But whether or not it would stack up against other generic HRTFs is a question. And going back to what you were saying there, Stefan, about, you know, preferring different sets of HRTFs for different aspects of production, for spaciousness, for timbre, or whatever. The interesting thing is that I know other authors who have done similar studies on this, and they found that on a daily basis, your preference changes. So what you might, you might prefer HRTF set number 10 today, and tomorrow it might be, you know, number 20, and so it's a nightmare.
Well, there's actually a question on the side here, and this is actually a good place to bring it in. Somebody's asked, and I'm going to tie this into what we're talking about here. Somebody said, how do you see the prospects of VR and AR content? Is this going to become mainstream one day, and what's still missing for that to happen? Now, tying this into what you've just said, this is actually really, really important, because if we want it to be mainstream, if we want there to be every person who owns a PlayStation has a PSVR, and every person who has an iPhone basically has the Apple AR plugged into it, and every, you know, like they're ubiquitous as smartphones, then the whole idea of which HRTF should you use, and do you want your custom one, etc., the average punter is not going to be interested in that at all. They want to be blown away. They want to be told what to buy. They want to be able to go out and do something like this, where they reach across their desk and they go, yep, look, there's my device. I bought the device because that's the one I've got. It does everything I need to. I don't need to set up a whole bunch of sensors around the room. I don't need to calibrate it every time I want to. I put it on. I mean, this is the whole point of game consoles when they first came out. Get the disc, put it in, press play, go. And if unless we can make these sorts of decisions work for the average user, and say, this is just going to sound amazing, you're going to be blown away, we can't become mainstream until we've sort of sorted this stuff out, because your average user is just going to be intimidated by that and just go, nah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's, again, it's a chicken and the egg thing as well, though, isn't it? Because actually, to do that, we need to create the content. But in order to create the content, we need to convince enough producers to come on board and to adopt this stuff and to get producing content for this stuff. And a lot of them, from my experience, and maybe you guys feel differently, but a lot of them feel kind of, afraid to embrace these things, because they're like, you know, I've tried out some of these platforms and my sound design hasn't sounded very good, and I'm just worried about my reputation, and I don't have time to be dealing with learning new stuff. You know, so it becomes a real challenge. And again, it's one of education, isn't it? So I think we've got a chicken and the egg scenario here.
I agree. I mean, VR now has got to the point now where it's not going to go away. It's useful for outside of gaming. It's useful for a whole bunch of other applications, which means that the technology will still develop, and we will get to the point where it is, it is, I suppose, what you would call mainstream. The thing that we're lacking at the moment is the killer app.
Yep.
Which can drive sales. That killer app is probably not going to be anything like the content that's out there at the moment. It's not going to be a port of a normal standard PlayStation or Xbox game. It's going to be something completely different. But when it comes, it will drive the sales, and it will then drive innovation and creativity from the rest of the industry. So I don't really have any real concerns about it being a sort of about it having already peaked. I don't think that's the case at all. But creators need to experiment with the platforms, which they are doing now, and there will come a time when people will have the tools and the vision, I think, to create something that is, as I say, very different from the type of game that you'll play on a screen. I'm looking forward to more narrative-driven titles, and titles that avoid the problems associated with VR, such as the motion sickness thing. But once people have got a handle on those issues and design around them, I think that I think it's still going to be a very bright future for VR.
Yeah, I don't think we've even come close to thinking about what the killer app could be. I agree totally with Gary. People are trying to shoehorn all of their old styles into something that is completely different. It literally is like, somebody going, we're going to make this radio play and we're going to put it on television. And there's just going to be people standing there in a studio and we're going to watch them talking into microphones, and it would be really boring and completely does not utilize that new medium. And this is the whole thing here, is that some of the thing about VR that does grab me, and I'll go back to the Bridge Commander, the Star Trek one, is that the sense of scale in VR is the thing that I absolutely love, where you see a thing, whether it's a giant creature in Fallout, or you're in an X-Wing, or in the Star Trek one, you literally start in a little pod, you turn the corner, and there in front of you is the Enterprise, and it's full size to you, and you're like, oh my God, like, I'm a geek and this is what I've wanted my entire life, and it's right there, and it's not a little thing on a screen. I am there and I'm getting closer to it, and it's huge. Scale is really, really important, but it's still kind of most of the experiences I've had have still been old formats just crammed into this new thing. I think when somebody does come up with something that really, really takes absolute advantage of VR, and as Gary says, avoids all the problems with VR, I think all of us are just going to be sitting there going, this was so obvious, I can't believe I didn't think about this, but this is the most incredible thing I've ever experienced, and I'm just going to plug myself into for the next 17 days straight. Please just feed me so I don't die. Like, literally, I honestly believe that when it comes out, people will just not ever want to leave.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting for that.
I
want to do the sound design for it.
Yeah. So okay. I mean, I think everything that you guys are saying rings true here. I wonder, is there anything on the tools side that we can kind of say, all right, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of commonality or some aspect to the tools that could be, again, standardized is probably too strong a word actually when it comes to tools, but workflows that could be, I don't know, the same type of workflows within certain structures, within certain genres and platforms, that could help sound designers in being more creative and being, getting content together quicker for the platforms.
I think yes, because in the same way that you pick up any single door that you've got anywhere on the planet, and there's some commonalities there, They all allow me to pan between left and right if I'm working with stereo. They all allow me to adjust volume. You know, in most cases, I can automate both those things. And there's a whole bunch of other things you can do similar things for. I think if we can basically say, hey, if you're working in spatial audio or 360 audio or whatever, we need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And if you're making a new product or you're making a new plugin for your tool or whatever, please give us stereo panning left and right. Please give us volume control. Please give us whatever. You know, I think having those sorts of things that are commonalities would, I think that would help.
I think there needs to be some innovation in terms of in VR tools, so that you can create the content that you need to while you're actually in the world. Now that requires a lot of work on UI functionality within a VR world. And a friend of mine, totally unrelated to games, is working on some sort of world building content in VR, and trying to give people the tools within a VR framework so that they can make stuff actually in the world. That is where I think that there needs to be more work done on the game side. Is that people need to create. One of the big problems we have is creating content, going in, checking it, coming out, making changes.
Yep.
You need to be able to work in the world, build in the world, and test iteratively in the world.
Mixing becomes a two-person job. There's one person with the VR headset on and everything like that, and there's somebody else over the side controlling things, and you're literally going, make that louder, make that softer, blah, 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 because for exactly what Gary said, I found that with both VR and AR, it literally becomes a two-person job to do mixing.
Okay, very cool. I mean, I wondered literally when you said back there things like X, Y, and Z, Stefan. I mean, actual things like coordinate systems and so forth. You know, within DAWs. You know, for example, you know, if you're doing panning, you know, to ensure that, okay, if you're using head tracking, that, okay, if you're using yaw, tilt, and tumble, and you're developing apps, they're using the correct coordinate system that uses, roll, pitch, and yaw in the right way, you know, rather than yaw, pitch, and roll and so forth. That can end up you end up in a different position where you should be. Are these things that could be on the technical side standardized, or is that just too trivial a thing?
Well, the problem there is that okay. So people are going to be working in Unity and or Unreal or other things. There are other tools, obviously, but those two. And from vague memory, I think X, Y, and Z between Unity and Unreal might be slightly different. I can't remember 100%, but I've got a gut feeling that they are slightly different. And so if you've got the two major engine manufacturers, Gary's just had to sign out. He has to go. If you've got the two major game engine manufacturers who are not agreeing on that, we haven't got a hope in hell of defining those things. They're not going to change just because we asked them to. But it's interesting because somebody else has asked a question that's sort of related to this, because somebody's saying, any comment on the future skills sound designers will need to develop to work effectively in this field? Our company puts focus on being competent in Unity and Unreal because it's so difficult to mix and fine tune our mixes without direct access to the engines. And this is the sort of thing, if you're using Unreal and you're using Wise, or you're using Unity and you're using Fmod, or you're using one of the other game audio, like they all approach things in their own way. And so I agree that having some standards in these things have value, but I think you're going to be pushing bricks uphill to get companies to change stuff, because they'll be like, well, get them change it first. You know what I mean? If we sort of say, well, we think the way that Unreal does it is great, Unity, can you change it? They'll be like, no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is. I mean, I think this is the bane of every working group on the planet for such things. I know SMPTE have huge issues with this when dealing with big companies. Nobody wants to push. Everybody wants to push their own sort of methodology and standards forward, and nobody wants to kind of defer from that. So that's why I'm kind of thinking back a step here in terms of the common traits that are consistent across all of these different technologies. And again, things like ambisonics and things like HRTF processing and so forth, these could be areas that not so much standardizing HRTF sets, but standardizing routes to enabling things like customization and certain workflows. So going back to that question though about future skills for sound designers, I think that's a really important one actually, because the landscape is changing so rapidly.
Yes.
That we have our students here ask us the same questions, about how to prepare for an industry that is constantly evolving. It's a very, very tricky one. You have to be very adaptable and very resilient. But I think there are certain core elements within game design, within signal processing for VR and AR, things like ambisonics and HRTFs that you should understand, and getting your head around some of those common workflows and getting used to some of those workflows. But it will change by the time we have graduates who leave our university, and they go to get jobs within 6 months. The tools have changed dramatically.
One of the issues with that, and Linda had told me this, and Brian Schmidt for Game SoundCon has told me this, and other people told me this for GDC, is that one of the biggest problems, and in fact, it's the reason why I wrote the book, is because all the companies from Sony to Magic Leap to Apple to everybody at the moment are all developing their stuff with their internal teams, and everybody is under telephone book thick NDAs of you can't tell anybody about this, otherwise we send out the company assassins. And when I finished my contract for Magic Leap, I basically went, great, fantastic. And that's why I spent all the time on the book, because I thought whilst I'm in the midst of all of this, I want to get a lot of this down on paper so that I can remember it for myself, but also so that I can share a lot of the knowledge that I had with other people, just to get that information out there, because there are not that many people talking about it. There are not that many postmortems being done at conferences. I mean, at GDC, I'm about to put in a submission for a presentation where I'm actually doing a postmortem comparison of 3 VR projects that I worked on, specifically to try and get as much information to the general audience as possible. So with those, what skills do we need? Unfortunately, a lot of the skills almost aren't things that can be predicted. They're almost things that you find when you work on it. I went to talk to the guys from Criterion who did the X-Wing VR experience. And those are guys who'd never worked on anything before VR-wise. They did a brilliant job, but they did a brilliant job because they were given the time and the budget and the team to iterate, test, iterate, because it was obviously, this is a big showcase. And it was like, guys, get it right, and we will support you in every way to do that. And I think that support is critical. I know people who have told me, oh yeah, we're doing a VR version of this game we just did. And I've said to them, oh, if you need any help, let me know. And they said, yeah, we've only got till next Wednesday. We got told about it 2 days ago. And so literally there are publishers who are just spitting out VR thinking they'll make a few extra bucks on it, but they do not want to spend a cent on working on it. And that's killing it.
Yeah,
I want to also touch in on that. So in terms of what kind of skills you can learn for the future in Unity and Unreal, you can learn all the programming and scripting tools that those engines have to offer. But if you're not putting yourself into practical applications, like Stefan said, then you really aren't learning a lot about how to design in these scenarios. Take example, the X-Wing, right? You're locked in a seat, you're inside a spaceship. What are the limitations? What are the opportunities for sound here? They're going to be very different compared to if you're walking around on your feet in a big world environment, or if you're walking around on your feet in a small world environment. There's all sorts of different ways you can design for those scenarios, and how you're going to spend your time in those different scenarios as well. If you're in an open world, you're going to have to find all different ways of complicated, I'm in here, I'm in there sort of stuff. If you're in a small environment, you can sort of encapsulate yourself inside of that environment. And you have to learn to take advantage of that stuff. And there's all kinds of tutorials out there that you can learn from. There's free project templates that you can download and sort of just say, hey, all right, maybe I'm in a white box, but I'm going to imagine this white box is, an X-Wing or whatever, and start to find out what it's like to put sounds in different spaces of that ship, right? Those are the sort of things that are going to make you a better sound designer for the future, because things are always going to be changing. You can't be afraid of that. You have to adapt. That's just the role we play. But definitely have some scripting experience. C# and C++ are the two big ones right now. That could change in a year or two, but it doesn't mean that you should start learning, because the more that you learn, the more it all makes sense when you go to the other one. You're going to go from one to the other and go, oh, this makes sense. I just got to change, a little bit of the way that I put things together. But the design principles pretty much stay the same.
Well, actually, on design principles, one of the things that I did, because I'd been working in VR stuff, I did a standard PlayStation 4 game last year. And it was an open world game. And when I built the open world game, I basically applied all of the environmental VR spatial ideas to this game. So I built this world as though it was going to be a VR game in a lot of ways. I treated how I was going to put the sounds and position them and all that sort of stuff. I treated it as though it was a VR game. And interestingly enough, it made it a much better normal console game. The sound design worked so much better. So the interesting thing about this is normal game sound design doesn't work in VR, but if you up your game to VR, it'll actually make your normal platform, your normal console game sound better anyway. So any of the sorts of knowledge or skills and stuff you could learn or apply from spatial audio for VR and AR are directly transferable to a lot of the more standard console and PC platform type content.
And I think as well, there's another thing that we can do as well, in educating people in all of this, is the idea of giving them projects and test templates and things to work with and to play around with for these different platforms, to experiment. Because actually, that is worth its weight in gold, that you have, something in Unity that you can just play around with. You can get a feel for what's happening, feel for the whatever the Google Spatializer or whatever in that platform. It's fantastic, and I think one of the things that we should do is to encourage those companies who have these different platforms to produce good demonstration templates that people can load projects from and work with from and start off working with them, and these are things that we can link into the wiki as well. So okay, this is all sounding really cool, guys. I am cognizant of the time here as well. Is there anything else then on standards that we want to address before the upcoming meeting next week?
I still think that it's possibly a bit premature for that. I mean, I certainly think the question should be asked, and I think you should keep asking that question over and over again, Gavin. And I think every time somebody gives you any kind of feedback on that question, just write it down and archive it for later. I think at this stage, it's a little bit like, and in fact, we've been in this position for the last 2 or 3, 5 years or whatever. We still are in a situation where we don't know what we don't know. And we just need to keep poking it a little bit until we find out. So trying to sort of define standards, I think at this stage, you ask that question literally just to get a response out of people and see what response you get out of people. And then you go, interesting, write it down for later. I don't know that there's much else we can do beyond that right at this point in time. That's my gut feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to this. And if there's people who are watching this or who watch this YouTube video later, please do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear your input on this. If there's particular areas that you think, could be potentially standardized later on down the line or are good contenders for it, let us know, and we can discuss them in this forum at a later date as well. Cool. Okay. I'm just wondering, is there anything else, any other business that people want to talk about before we kind of wrap this up for today?
So I'm just going to say here, if anybody in the YouTube thing has got any more questions, please speak now or forever hold your peace. I'll need to give that the 20 seconds delay for it to come through. So Chris has just said, one approach to standards might be to, instead of standardizing a format, standardize how to evaluate. There you go. There's a comment worth taking on board.
This is a very good comment actually, because you know we've been doing a lot of work, for example, on 6 Degrees of Freedom. And how do you assess a 6 Degrees of Freedom virtual environment? Do you take somebody through a predefined trajectory in that environment, or do you allow them to just wander the space free as they wish? And some person might experience something in the space that another person might not. You know, I think that's a very pertinent question.
No, it is. And because one of the big things, and I've said this to students, and they kind of don't get it, especially when I'm dealing with students who work in the linear. I quite often have had students, I've been a music producer, I've worked on live bands, blah, 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 blah. And when I say to them that with games, the final mix doesn't actually happen until the player is playing the game, it freaks them out, because like, what? How can you put it out? How can you possibly put that out? I'm like, there is no choice. The final mix occurs because I don't know whether they're going to stand to the left of the big loud monster, the right of the big loud monster, on its head, carry it around. I honestly don't know.
Yeah. I mean, one could say that, you know, if you have enough players who could experience the game, that statistically all of these things would average out over time. But you need a lot of people to do that, and sometimes that's just not feasible. Cool. Great.
Well, we've got one more question, which is actually a really good one for us to end on. And Robert, you might have some comments on this. Somebody's asked, good examples of sound design in VR products for us all to check out. Are there any gems out there that may not be so mainstream that we don't already know about? I will quickly say that the X-Wing one, so the X-Wing experience was a free download for Star Wars Battlefront 1. So it's on PlayStation VR only. And it was excellent because they utilized the limitations of the things they had, but there were really simple things they did. When the game starts, literally there is an X-Wing just sitting in a white void. So it's kind of like a hangar. And when I first saw that, and I'm looking at it and going, there's an X-Wing in front of me. And I just went, oh, cool. And the PSVR microphone picked up my voice, added the right reverb for the space that I was in, and played it back to me. So I heard my own voice with the echo of the space I was in. And I was just like, that was so simple and that was so brilliant. So I highly recommend that one. That's actually a very, very good example of good sound design for VR.
Okay.
Rob,
have you got anything?
I'll tell you what. I hate to pull up somebody that's on the video, but Stefan did a fantastic job on the VR Regatta with the sailing experience. It's a very lesser unknown title out there. There's no bells and whistles on it. You're on a sailboat, you're out in the water, and it just shows you how fantastic these very simple features are, paired with the cross-modal cues of the sound design. Just hearing, the wind hit the furl and things like that, and hearing the water splash on the sides of the boat. These are very effective things about putting you in a tranquil state of mind. At least for me, when I'm just sitting in my office, I don't always want to just go around and shoot a bunch of monsters and have a bunch of visual input on my face. So to go into this experience and just relax and sail around and really have the audio support that is fantastic. Also, there's a pretty neat app out there called Wave VR, which is sort of like a social VR platform. They have a lot of music and stuff out there. I think they're touching into a lot of interesting stuff. There's also AltSpace VR. That's a social VR platform. It's very interesting to go into these different social platforms on different devices and sort of see how the audio is treated for whether it's the voice implementation or how they're treating acoustics in the environments or the little effects. I'm sort of paying a lot of attention to those little details right now, because I think that's sort of where the future is heading, is as we get more people into VR, they're going to want to be in these sort of social environments or these hubs. If you saw the movie Ready Player One, you can see where there's a great potential for that, where you've got everybody on Facebook, you got everybody watching on YouTube, you got everybody on Google Hangouts, whatever. What's that going to be like for VR? So I'm very interested in what's going on in all those applications right now, and looking at ways to improve the sound design for that.
The point I'll make on that is I think for VR, I think subtlety is really, really important. And thank you, Robert. But that's kind of what I got to do with the VR regatta, and like there's to get the effect of the wind. There's like about 7 different layers. There's positional. There's HRTF positional sort of stuff. There's a directional wind that sort of sits over there. But there is also a sweet spot of when you look directly into the wind. That was what I was talking about before. There is a stereo sound that plays only when you're looking directly into the wind. And if you turn your head either way, it fades out immediately. But if you're looking into the wind, you get this stereo wind sound of wind blowing past your ears. And there's just a whole level of subtlety in that. And I really enjoyed working on something where I could dig down into the subtlety, because I've realized that for VR, I think you can probably wow people far more with subtlety than you can with giant explosions and gunshots. I think giant explosions and gunshots in VR are just going to become very tired very quickly.
Absolutely, yeah. Guys, listen, thanks so much for everything today. I just want to wrap up by saying that yes, we have AVAR next week, so it's Monday August the 20th is when the conference starts, through to August the 22nd. The physical meetup of the New Realities group will happen on the Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. So just before the first session of the conference. So hopefully we'll see all of those people over the West Coast at that meeting, those who can attend the conference. But certainly if you've been borderline about going to the conference, please try and get to it. It looks awesome. Some fantastic keynote addresses. You know, Jean-Marc Jot from Magic Leap is going to be talking about his spatial audio work. Ivan Tashev from Microsoft Research, and Ravish Mehra from Facebook as well. So some great people talking. Do try and get along to it. Otherwise, thanks a lot for all the discussion, guys. It's been really, really stimulating. We'll have another one of these hopefully in about a month's time. And I think we're set on talking about the terminology around all of this and trying to kind of make some sense of what's out there.
Yeah. What I'm going to do is in the comments bit of the video, I will actually leave a comment saying, please, anybody who watches this video, if you've got any comments, please place them in here and I will pass them on to the group. So I will monitor any comments that come from the video, and I will pass them back via email so that anybody who watches this video at any point in the next 100 years, we can take that information on board and you know, basically point it in the right direction where hopefully it'll be useful to people.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much, folks. Thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.